My fellow Americans, our sons, pride of our nation, have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic and to set free a suffering humanity. Men's souls will be shaken with the violences of war.
You just have to see it to believe what it is. I think 6 million of them. Their lives were taken. 1.5 million of little children. And it just makes you, I guess, I don't know, I have terrible feelings about it.
The darkness will be rent by noise and flame.
One of the most horrible things I ever saw, never.
For these men are lately drawn from the ways of peace. They fight to liberate. They fight to let justice arise and tolerance and goodwill among all thy people.
Our first engagement was at St. Lo. The Battle of St. Lo was just about over. There was hedgerows in that area, and so we went down the road with firing our guns and not knowing where the Germans were, that the infantry or the Germans used those hedgerows for camouflage and concealment, and so we simply just kind of mowed the area, and they knew where we were going and towards the front, and so we did stop and spend the night in an area that had recent combat in it. The smell of death was everywhere. There were dead animals, horses, cattle, wrecked vehicles, wrecked American vehicles, German tanks knocked out. It was just you knew then, now you were getting into something that was the real thing. Everybody was apprehensive. Of course, you were scared right then and there, and you weren't there even to battle yet, but that's just a natural thing.
Reality began to hit newly arrived soldiers. Fear settled into the hearts of the soldiers, and they realized that war is never predictable. As time progressed, the unpredictable nature of war became evident. Conflicts escalated, and so did the sentiment of fear.
Now, we buttoned our tanks up. In other words, they were using periscopes, but I wasn't. I was the tank commander, and I sat in the turret, and I observed my hatch was open. This fellow that was firing his machine gun pulled on my leg because he was down here, and I just got down. I knew he meant something, and just as I got down to look through my periscope, it hit me in the face. The bottom of it all come back and hit me.
Persinger looked in his periscope but was unable to see anything except shattered glass. His periscope had been hit by a bullet.
My bullet went right through that cover and and hit the periscope and shattered that. Now, had that somebody was with me, or otherwise I would have had that bullet right back here, right through my head. There was a sniper in a tree, and I was in his sights, and for that, this happened. I had to get back down in. So, it scared me so, I thought, we got to go all the way to Berlin, and this, my thoughts scared to death. Yep. But I guess, you got to do something like that. It's hard to face that.
The next task at hand was to capture the city of Metz. When the Third Army arrived at Metz, they were quickly drawn into a stalemate with German forces over the control of the city and its perimeters. It was clear now that Fort Driant would have to be taken in order to establish control of the fortifications surrounding the city. However, as troops advanced to Fort Driant, machine guns and mortars immediately began firing on the soldiers. By October 9th, General Patton decided to bypass Fort Driant. However, the city could not be bypassed. Several of its forts had guns directed towards bridges on the Moselle River. The Moselle River was of crucial importance to the American forces as its bridges provided a way into Germany. Eventually, the Allied forces won control over the city of Metz and crossed the Moselle River into Germany on the 17th of December. Persinger's unit was the first American unit of the 20th Corps of the Third Army to enter Germany. The Third Army then began their assault on the Siegfried Line.
So then we got into crossed the Moselle River into the Siegfried Line. That's a German line. Hitler was where he got the crazy idea that he should have cement embankments in the ground. At the base of them were probably 3 to 4 feet in a pyramid type thing, staggered, and all the way, just like a bunch of them. So you could not drive, of course, that would, but if there's a little town that you had to go through to get in to cross the Siegfried Line, there were 2 big guns protecting that entry into the towns or the villages. Slave labor in 1938 started digging, when they started this Siegfried Line, a trench, a wide trench, so that you would have to fall into that and then come out to get across. So it was impossible just to drive a vehicle across. It was, of course, it stopped it. But General Patton laughed at that thing. He says, all we'll do is fill it over, put dirt, and we'll drive right over it. And that's exactly what they done.
Having successfully overcome the Dragon's Teeth and the deep trenches, the Third Army had begun to weaken the German border defenses. However, the Third Army was yet to overcome the pillboxes and anti-tank machine guns which guarded the entry to the German towns. During this time, the reconnaissance unit of the Third Army played a crucial role. The reconnaissance unit was responsible to find valuable information about the terrain and the enemy before sending the majority of the troops into the area. As Persinger said, the reconnaissance unit was the eyes and the ears of the whole armored and infantry divisions behind it.
Any reconnaissance unit had to go out and find the enemy. And that's, we've done that all the way through. For the next year, that's what we've done. It got so we were in German territory more than we were in our safe American territory. We were out behind the lines most of the time. The 20th Armored Division came up through a little town of where we were at, Walkern, Germany. They were going to make an advance and take that town that one particular day. And we had told them, because we had been on patrol, night patrol and day patrols, we did a lot of that. And we saw what was there, and we knew exactly how it had to be. We weren't going to go any further. And we told our captain, my captain, I heard him tell this colonel not to go over that hill. He says, we'll do it. And I don't know why he did that, but he was told what was there.
When lives are on the line, effective communication within the unit is essential.
I remember that we tuned in on their channel, the radios, and we listened to this as they approached to go over the knoll. They got within 200 yards of those 2 88-millimeter guns. And that particular morning, within a half hour, there were 14 of those big Sherman tanks, our tanks, completely destroyed. The armor-piercing round from that gun would go right through the front slope plate of the tank and out the back end. You could see right through. They knocked out these, and I'll never forget those poor guys in those tanks screaming for all the help they could get. One man I heard telling that he put his tourniquet on his legs, but he couldn't stop the bleeding. And, oh, it was just terrible. The next day, well, that particular night then, the 135th Engineer Battalion got into those two forts where those guns were and blew them up with a torpedo that they could do that with. And how they done it, I'll never know, but they destroyed those two 88 millimeter guns that night. So then that next day, we went to help retrieve with the maintenance crews, and the tank retrievers were sent up to get those tanks and those bodies out of those tanks. And of course, they all burnt a fire, they burned up, most of them.
For a deliberate attack, just knowing that the enemy is on a particular hill is not sufficient. You must know the locations of his weapons so you can isolate or suppress them. You must know how he has prepared the ground. In such situations, the intelligence gathered by reconnaissance units cannot go unheard. And when our own impulses and inclinations dominate, we hardly listen to what is being said.
So we did get into that town, but the German infantry was on the end of this, probably 200 yards down a street. We went into and got into this corner house. There was no civilians in the town then. And we had tanks, we had roads leading out. We outposted the whole, our side of the town. And we called this street, if you opened the door and tried to walk out of that house, we call it the bowling alley because they just let loose with the machine gun fire. And there was a house on the end, it was in a T, and we were on the end of the T on the side. So we were in the basement mostly because the artillery fire, mortar fire, they had mortars. It wasn't our big artillery, it was mortar fire. The last thing that's all the time happened. If you moved, they throw a mortar in on you. That night or the second night, I had to move my tank with my driver to a different street and to outpost for the night. So we moved the tank, we just got outside and it was getting dark, cold, and we run across the road on the opposite side of the road to get to our tank and got in, and just as we were starting to get in, the mortars came in. I got hit on the back of my hand when I was getting up on the tank, and a piece cut my side. But that's what happened with a lot of us. You never knew what the day would be when you get up in the morning, or what you'd do all day long, and the missions that you had to go on.
For all soldiers, every morning brought with it a fear of the unknown. A soldier went into a mission never knowing whether or not he would come out alive. Despite such emotional struggles, the Army always moved forward. As General Patton said, you moved towards the enemy.
But anyway, then comes the Battle of the Bulge. Now it's December 16th and it's cold and it's been snowing and it's now getting very cold. There were many casualties on both sides. There were 600,000 troops engaged in that battle. And this was the largest battle that the American Army had ever been in. In comparison to the wars today, there's nothing like that.
During the largest land battle, poorly equipped American forces fought not only against the Germans, but also against the brutal weather during one of the coldest winters in history. The challenges of the battle amplified when the cold became the most dangerous enemy.
We were really driven back. When we, in the snow and in the cold, was terrible. You couldn't stay in a tank overnight if you didn't have an engine running and have a heat. There was a heaters in the tank, but you would freeze to death because it was temperatures as low as 18 below zero for about 3 days. Now you're out here in this snow and that kind of weather with ordinary shoes, so that was your protection. So it was a terrible, terrible thing. I just can't tell you how severe that was. Can you imagine trying to stay alive and weather, just to conquer the weather?
During the Battle of the Bulge, many soldiers lost their battle with the weather. The Americans suffered around 75,000 casualties. However, the Germans were hit the hardest. They nearly lost 80,000 to 100,000 men. German strength was now severely impaired, and Hitler's quest to regain the initiative in the West and compel the Allies to settle for a negotiated peace remained unsuccessful. After defeating the German forces, the Allied forces continued with their missions. The Third Army made its way across the Rhine River only to run into a group of Hungarian soldiers.
On the 5th of May, that particular day, we ran into a bunch of Hungarians. There was about 1,200 of them. We engaged them. One of our tanks in my platoon got hit and knocked out and killed 2 of the crewmen. The rest were injured badly. After that firefight that we got into, we stopped in London. The next morning, I got with my platoon. I was to follow a reconnaissance platoon into this town, and our mission was simply to come to this town and outpost it and wait till the war ended. We no more got into there, and then we heard the civilians then told us of a concentration camp up in the mountains. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was called into we called it the command post, CP, and I was given instructions of what I should do. I was to take my tank and another tank of my platoon and go up there. We started off up this, now it's a nice blacktop road, but there it was just a gravel road all the way up it. We went slowly. We saw some prisoners that had escaped and going down on some open ground, but we didn't know what would happen. But we got about 150 yards from this entrance to this camp. We had to make a right-hand turn, and when we turned, I saw this, looked down the road, and I saw all of this, saw the fences, the barbed wire fences, those pine trees. It looked like a bunch of ghosts standing there. And we peered down to those poor people standing in filth, no clothes on, some of them with no clothes, some with just the trousers, some with just the tops, standing in that filth, ankle deep, some with shoes, some with wooden shoes, some with nothing, just standing there. The stench was so bad, you could smell it, like I say, about 150 yards away from the gate. We could smell it, just the smell of death was just sickening.
The smell of the dead, combined with the stenches of sickness, urine, and feces, was unbearable. Quickly, this mission became the worst nightmare of the 3rd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron of the U.S. Army. However, the mission became the saving grace of the prisoners. Liberation aroused emotions of joy and euphoria in the survivors. Evansy survivors realized that they no longer had to answer to the Nazis or fear their persecution.
We got there, they were so excited and jubilant. They were just so thrilled to see us. And so it's cheering, so just to see us, they saw that beautiful white star on our front slope plate, and they knew they had never seen anything like that. And we started passing out all the rations we had in our tank. We had probably enough rations for our crew to feed on for at least a week. And some of those poor people got the treat of the day, the months, the years that they'd been there. And so many of them just skin and bones, much worse. Some of them, you know, they were weighing 75, 80 pounds, hardly able to walk. It just starved to death.
Every day, prisoners arose at 4:30 a.m. and worked until 6 p.m. Their food rations consisted of a half a liter of coffee in the morning, 3/4 of a liter of hot water containing potato peelings in the afternoon, and only 150 grams of bread in the evening. With poor diets and rigorous workdays, the health of all prisoners was greatly compromised. Persinger made personal contact with one such prisoner named Max Garcia.
We give all these people everything we had, and they were screaming, and I couldn't understand a word whatsoever. I lit up a cigarette, a Lucky Strike, and you needed something to calm your nerves, and so I just lit that cigarette up. And he saw the package, the little package. He says in English, "It's been a long time since I've had a Lucky Strike." I looked down to the man, and I said, "Did I hear you speak English?" "Yes." So I said, "Come up." And he got up on their tank. And I took a puff of I lit a cigarette for him. And he took a puff of that cigarette, and he just about went down, he collapsed. And finally revived, he come to, and he didn't want no more of that cigarette. So the man, he appreciated it so much for us saving, but he said we saved his life. Maybe we did. I'm sure we did. Had he been there, nobody come, they would have starved, and they would have all starved to death, worked to death.
Liberated on May 6, 1945, Camp Ebensee had a total approximated number of 20,000 deaths. About 750 died in the wake of the camp's liberation. Fortunately, Garcia was not one of them.
Then I started asking him questions, and he told me about it. He said, "Well, come down, get off, and thanks, let me take you around. I know I'll show you everything in this camp." Well, we talked on the radio, both crews, and well, we didn't want to get down amongst that mess because these poor people, filth, sores all over them and on their arms, on their faces. It's just, it was a terrible sight, the smell, the stench. And we saw some bodies. Now these bodies laying out in that filthy roll call square area were just torn apart. Well, this is gruesome, but that's what it was. And so immediately found out from him that those bodies were people who were called capos.
Capos collaborated with the SS officers to control the barracks and to control anybody that was out of line. Their main task was to push prisoners to work harder. In exchange for their services, SS officers gave capos access to certain privileges such as extra food and shorter workdays. In order to justify their privileges in front of the SS men, capos often displayed great brutality towards the prisoners. Many felt they were caught in the middle, being both victim and perpetrator.
And being there was nobody there, they literally got them guys and killed them that way.
With the approach of liberation, the SS officers had deserted, leaving the capos as the main target of the prisoners.
I'm telling you, the stench was so bad coming out of there, and we walked through, the men would line there on the bunks. Their eyes wouldn't follow you, they were just staring into space. And a lot of them they were dying. And the others would wave, and they would recognize you, and we got out of there, we couldn't. So we thought, this is enough. And we said, no, you must go through this crematorium. So we did. there was bodies piled up outside of the walls. Those bodies were piled there and another pile all the way around the 3 walls, and on the 4th wall had the furnaces where they burnt them. And these were lying there, ready to be burned. They were burning it around the clock and couldn't keep up.
The 25 barracks were designed to hold 100 prisoners each. In reality, each barrack held at least 750 prisoners. Crowded conditions led to a rapid spread of typhus, tuberculosis, and dysentery. With these diseases overwhelming the population of the concentration camp, the crematorium was unable to keep pace with the deaths.
This man was in the concentration camp when we went in there, and he tells me he was waving frantically, so was everybody else, you know, and I couldn't understand him, but what he was trying to do was get our attention to get his brother out amongst those dead bodies that were laying there, because he was unable to get up and work. He was so weak he couldn't, and if you had to lie down and couldn't get up, you were just hit over the head, and now you're done away with. So he went, got in amongst those dead bodies, and he laid there. He was there for 3 days, 3 nights.
Survivors of the Ebensee concentration camp were tortured by their memories. Among the most painful memories was separation. Over the course of the war, many families were torn apart. Separation tormented both parents and children. Children were ripped from their mother's arms, wives were separated from their husbands, families were no longer families. The emotional pains of separation were constant and the worries many. Each feared for the other's safety and was powerless to do anything about it.
Every Friday, they collected these bodies and put them on wagons. There's wagon load after wagon load of bodies. There they are, bringing up to the crematorium to be piled up, to be burned. How they could handle those bodies and pick them up was beyond me, the way people handle them. I must tell you that all of us, all 10 of us guys, we were crying, we were sick, and some of them vomited going through this crematorium. We had seen enough. We had seen terrible scenes before we ever got to this camp, but nothing like this.
For us at home, fathers, mothers, children, wives, sisters, and brothers of brave men overseas, whose thoughts and prayers are ever with them.
I couldn't even tell that to my mother. I told her of the concentration camp, and I just left it there, you know. I couldn't talk about it because nobody here really knows what I was talking about. I wouldn't believe you if you told them.
They yearn but for the end of battle, for their return to the haven of home.
You now are so far away from any other help. Everything back home is gone. You're not even close to those folks. You can't holler for help from home. And so that's why there was such a thing, I think. We never called it a band of brothers, but we were just close as could be. Very close.
Some will never return.
I lost a lot of good, wonderful friends. June, injured, wounded, never came back.
Their road will be long and hard.
I couldn't forget that war. You know, the thoughts of this camp never leave me. Ebensee comes back, comes back.
Success may not come with rushing speed.
I think the reason, though, that we were able to stand those sights and what we saw there, because the war ended May 8th. 2 days later after we got there. It just seemed like such a relief when that happened. We knew now we're no more active combat. What a relief.
They will be sore tried by night and by day, without rest, until the victory is won.
It's the feeling of knowing that we now it's a safer place to live, and we probably exist. Because prior to that, as we said earlier, you never knew whether you'd see the sunset. On a lot of occasions.
By the righteousness of our cause, our sons will triumph and conquer the apostles of greed and racial arrogances. Lead us to the saving of our country, and with our sister nations into a world unity that will spell a sure peace, a peace invulnerable to the schemings of unworthy men, and a peace that will let all men live in freedom, reaping the just rewards of their honest toil.
On May 7, 1945, Germany signed an unconditional surrender at Allied headquarters in France to take effect the following day. The final surrender of the Germans occurred on May 8, 1945, ending the European conflict of World War II. Adolf Hitler had committed suicide and the Third Reich had fallen. However, Allied victory did not come without sacrifice. Many soldiers sacrificed not only their physical health, but also their mental health. The emotional effects of war on soldiers can be distressing. It seems so unfair that after all they've been through, soldiers continue to suffer, that they continue to be haunted by their memories. Perhaps when they dream, or even when they think or close their eyes, soldiers often recall the horrible sights they have witnessed. The emotional effects of war on soldiers do not end when they come home. Soldiers experience horrific events during the course of the war and return with unforgettable memories. However, soldiers try to find hope even in the worst situations. They try to find the light that will guide them home. They try to find a reason to hold on. Even more so, soldiers sacrificed their family life, everyday events, anniversaries, birthdays, and even the first words or steps of their children in order to secure the freedom and safety of all mankind. They fought to protect America's identity. They fought to protect the stars on the American flag, which are a symbol of the aspirations to which man has desired since the beginning of time. They fought for each individual stripe, which represents the rays of light symbolizing hope. They fought for the red, white, and blue colors found in the American flag. They fought to protect the meanings of these colors: red for valor, blue for justice, and white for freedom. If it wasn't for the soldiers' strong determination and morale, America might not stand for the same principles and ideologies it stands for today. If it wasn't for strong-willed soldiers such as Mr. Robert Persinger, we might have been living in a society in which all men are not equal. A society in which only the workings of a few evil men ruled the lives of innocent human beings. If it wasn't for Mr. Robert Persinger, I would have never been exposed to the worst side of war. I've been working on this documentary for nearly a year now. I've seen footage of emaciated survivors laying in barracks, motionless, just like ghosts. I've seen pictures of pained survivors grieving the loss of family. And worst of all, I've seen ghastly images of starved children, their ribcages showing from beneath their skin, their bodies withered away. If it weren't for Persinger, my eyes would have never witnessed such horrendous sights. However, if it wasn't for Persinger, I also would have never seen the joy and the happiness in the eyes of the survivors after liberation. I would have never seen the magical workings of hope. After all, hope is the strongest offense against the enemy. I've lived with these images in my head for nearly a year now. Even after a year, I still cannot believe that such a tragedy as the Holocaust occurred. However, each legacy carries a lesson to be learned. Mr. Persinger, through your legacy, you have gifted me the knowledge of the past and hope for the future. If I was to take one essential life lesson away from this project, it would be that you cannot simply forget. You cannot forget the torture endured by the targeted human beings. You must remember no matter how painful it might prove to be. You must remember not for yourself, but for the future generations to come. As human beings, we must all open our eyes. We must see and be aware of what is happening around us. We must always remember the presence of those who made sacrifices for our freedom and safety. We must always stand up for what is necessary and correct. We must always remain united as humankind to resist the evils of the world. We must stay true to our morals, and we must never lose hope, because it is the unconquerable soul of man, not the nature of the weapon he uses, that ensures victory.